Alex, welcome to the show. This is one I've been really, really looking forward to. So for those listening, Alex is the founder of FitProX, a coach education company. You're the owner of Fit Squad, DXB, and also FX
The
Careers.
FPX Careers, so our recruitment
Yes,
arm. Yeah, so
amazing.
a lot of plates, but all in the same vertical. Fitness has obviously been part of my life for forever, and always wanted to work in the fitness industry, and have just started in the fitness industry and just expanded into whatever opportunities have presented themselves. I feel very fortunate. I was speaking to somebody about this the other day, to still be working in the fitness industry. You know, it's an industry that garners a lot of attention, and people dip in and out of the fitness industry. So, you know, being 12 years deep in the fitness industry and never really being in any other industry, you know, I'm extremely fortunate that that's my job and that's what I get to talk about every day.
True, but you have really, really worked on, like you said, expanding vertically. And I think that's because obviously you got two options in business effectively if you want to continue to scale. And that's to expand horizontally and take up more of opportunities in the same niche, or vertically and actually just work your way up the chain. So for example, instead of coaching, you started coaching, like teaching coaches how to get their PT qual. On the other side of that, sourcing where to put them once they've actually got it, and finding them opportunities. So I think it's very much come off your back, but you're right. And I think fitness is actually one of these weird ones where, because it's a hobby and like a lifestyle, but also a career, I think it has that possibility to have such a high churn in terms of professionalism, because so most people, the vast majority, either go from sport or hobby, fitness enthusiast, into the professional. And a lot of the time you see them just go back out into one of the two. Whereas, for example, you don't get that with accounting. Like no one gets into accounting for
No.
shits and giggles,
Yeah, it wasn't like a favorite pastime of people,
Yeah.
which they then adopt as a work. But I think that there is a huge shift. So when I first started as a personal trainer, um, I mean, it was a difficult one. You know, it wasn't something that my parents were particularly keen for me to do. You know, back in it was like 2014, when I first started, 2013, 2014.
Right.
Um, it was kind of, the industry was just starting to grow, but it was typically a job that somebody did if they didn't have any other options, or if they'd been an ex-professional athlete that was looking for the next thing. You know, they hadn't quite made retirement money, and fitness was something that that was part of their life by proxy of doing their sport. And then, you know, there wasn't very many like independent gyms. There wasn't a lot of private PT studios. There was no online, obviously. When I started, you couldn't post videos on Instagram. So, you know, you're looking at a time when not many people were actually in the industry, and people who were in the industry had kind of either fallen into it or it was a last resort. You know, from running the education for, it's coming up to 10 years now. It's 10 years in September. Um, I now see people where that's their plan. That's, you know, they have other choices. They're well educated. They might have a sports science degree, or a business degree, a coaching
Yeah.
degree. And the plan was to use that to get into the fitness industry. Obviously, no, it's no surprise that the the money that people are able to make has been a big influence on that. Um, but it's now something that isn't a last resort for people. It's something that people are genuinely passionate about, and they see it as a business that they can create. And the reason that I'm passionate about helping people get into the fitness industry is because obviously I went through the journey, I was able to do it, but also there's such a low barrier to entry that you can legitimately start making money your first month, and you can make back the investment. You know, when you talk about going to university, the sunken cost in the UK for going to university is probably
Unbelievable.
close to 60K if you do 4 years,
Mhm.
plus any grants you get or bursaries or however that works. Um, you're looking at, you've got that, and then it's gaining interest. And realistically, your personal training course is something that you can make back within your first month. No job that you get from your degree, you're going to make 60K back in your first month. So, you know, getting people into the industry and seeing that they can, you know, quite quickly and quite confidently make it into a full-time thing is good because you get people, and in a couple of months there you can see them actually working and practicing and doing something, whether it is moving to Dubai, whether it's getting placed in a pure gym, whether it's setting up their own online and doing it alongside whatever else they're doing. um it's nice because it's instant gratification. You can see people 3 months down the line will go out and see them again and they're flying, and it's like, well, perfect.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that you mentioned that really spring to mind. In that, for one, the fitness industry, I'll always say, and I've always said this. Obviously, we've owned, built, and scaled a fitness company, or Ailish and I, and I just feel like it's genuinely like the easiest thing to kind of like sell on the planet, because like ultimately everyone wants to be in better shape, everyone wants to live longer and feel better, and that's where I think the core like heart of the fitness industry has just continued to, not quite exponentially, but you know, almost logarithmically expand year on year. I mean, even just take the classic example of how many people were doing marathons 10 years ago, and how many people as a percentage of Western populations have completed a half or a full marathon today, and it's ridiculous. And this trajectory has been really, really steady growth ever since kind of like the late 50s, early 60s, and
Mm.
then just started to really take off as um as more like you said, independent gyms, independent practitioners, and social media, I feel, just skyrocketed that.
Oh,
And people are
yeah.
so aware these days as well. um
Well, you can see through social media, you're exposed to a lot more than you would have ever been, um, in terms of looking at great physiques and seeing the personal journeys that people go on. Um, it's just so much more apparent that there are people out there who are able to put time and effort into the way that they look and achieve a body that other people would desire. And all the way down from micro influencers all the way up to the top people in the industry. There's people there that people can be inspired by. But I think one of the biggest changes that I've seen is, and I'll always speak to people when they're getting into the fitness industry, because there's a misconception that you have to be 6% body fat, shredded, in insane shape to be a personal trainer. And what I found, that some of the absolute best personal trainers are people who, let's take a scale of one being in absolutely no shape whatsoever, and 10 being like on the Mr. Olympia stage.
yeah
Like, you're at the pinnacle of what the body can do and what you can look like. People assume that you have to be up there 8, 9, 10 to be able to be a personal trainer. Actually, what you're looking for is, there's a lot more people who sit at a 2 and want to be a 5 than there are people who sit at an 8 and want to be a 10. As that scale goes up, it's not a bell curve. It just goes down in terms of the population. So there is billions of people in a 1, 2, and a 3. And then, there's hundreds of millions of people in a 3, 4, and a 5. And then all the way down to, there's like 8 people at a 10, and maybe a couple of hundred at a 9. So,
yeah
so for people who are getting into the industry and for people who are building up a good client base, the PTs who've been able to be a 2 and go to a 6 are in a much better position to help people move from a 2 to a 6. And sometimes that's what people are looking for.
Yeah, 100%. And like, I'll always say this to people, in that, you're not one of the most frustrating things, specifically in business, in this, example, is people saying to like Bill Gates or Elon Musk, for example, what would you do to start this business? It's a completely fucking irrelevant question, because, Elon can just magic hundreds of billions of dollars towards, like, not even hundreds, like a couple $1 billion out of thin air. He can just produce that, and then, it's completely useless to someone starting with, say, $100. And it's all about relative position from where they are to the goal. And if someone's 2, 3 steps ahead, that's actually the optimal point, because they still remember what it was like.
Yeah.
So I completely get what you mean. And also, there is literally someone for everyone,
Yeah.
And when you were explaining that curve, in the back of my head, I was like, oh yeah, it's kind of roughly bell curve shape. But you're right, it really isn't, in that we have, well, that the leading cause of malnutrition globally now has now swung from starvation to overfeeding. So we have this weird thing where there's never been more people who have been physically kind of fit and in shape. in a gym context, but also never had more people that were desperately in need of
Mm.
not just physique guidance, but like genuine health advice. And I suppose this kind of led me to asking, we were talking about this the other day, but are we seeing a revival of kind of in-person PT versus online?
I would say so. From what I've seen, obviously the barrier to entry for online coaching is even lower than in-person coaching. So as long as you have a laptop and access to the internet, then you can do it. Which just means that there are more people who are able to provide that service. On top of the fact that online coaching isn't really regulated, so because you're not in a gym, then there's no gym checking for your qualifications, and because you don't, need that same level of insurance that you would need for in person, the barrier for entry is super low. And whenever
Mm.
there is an easy barrier for entry, then you will get a bit of a race to the bottom because, well, you've seen it yourself. People will relocate to cheaper places to live in the world and therefore be able to charge less. So we're seeing that a lot more. It's the same reason that companies can outsource to the Philippines and India and Morocco and pay people, a quarter of the living wage that you would need to pay somebody in the UK. We're
Mm.
seeing that with online coaching, coupled with the fact that pretty much everything else has simultaneously got online. Now, a lot of people have this chasm where they don't have that interpersonal connection. So their work's online, they work from home. So that interaction's down the drain. And they, they have an online coach. Well, that interaction's gone, that in-person interaction's gone down the drain. So people are having to now manufacture reasons to leave the house. Whereas before, you didn't have that. Like it was just a given that Monday to Friday you were out the house at work, at your place of
Mm.
work, whatever it may be. Whereas now, there's a lot more, isolation. So I think that people who are offering good in-person services, which comes as part of a community. So, you've got in-person classes, small group training, price points not too dissimilar to online coaching, especially for good online coaches. For the price of a really good online coach, you could join a body transformation program in a gym, which sees you go in 3 times a week with 10 other people who are in a similar position to you. Before you
Mhm.
know it, you make friends with them, you go for coffee after. Well, now you've got a social circle, which is feeding into um, the coaching service. So if you've got people that you look forward to going and seeing in the gym, it's going to make you want to go to the gym more and want to do that more. Some online coaches don't struggle with this because they're really good at building a community online. I think especially if they're headed up by someone who's extremely personable and is good at bringing other people in and giving the members of their community onus over the community, so they feel like they're just as part of that community as the coach is. But again, it's just more difficult because you know yourself, how easy is it to connect? I mean, look, how easy is it having a conversation in person? We know each other really well, and it's still at the start of the conversation when we're just jumping on. I'm like trying to get the microphone to work. That I can't find the lead. I'm doing stuff. I'm trying to turn off notifications on WhatsApp. All of that noise that you get through digital, you just don't get in person. We see each other in person. We put our phones down and we just immediately just start talking.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I think you've actually kind of registered a really good point. And a couple of years ago, I started to observe this trend where people who were building online businesses, for example, like really purposefully and like having a mission led approach, really focused and put a huge amount of investment, and I know we did, into community
Hmm.
and cultivating a group. Because as I said earlier, there's something for everyone. But you're 100% right in that, you've seen the rise of running communities in Dubai. It is a huge thing, like a huge, huge thing. And, we've got friends who kind of like tongue in cheek kind of joke that running clubs are the new Hinge. And it seems quite funny. It's all this uh, lack of familiarity in a post-COVID world where, everything actually did become online. And then now we're like, oh, actually let's go touch some grass and remember what it's like to spend time with humans. But that makes complete sense. And I think where I was going with there's something for everyone. Typically, the women, so our business is only women. and it's more on the kind of high performing, successful engineers, scientists type of client. A lot of the time, they're now coming to online coaching to have a space where they can obviously take that next step up, but it doesn't have the physical time demands that, say, going to a gym class or, a gym PT would. And they want that kind of independence. But at the same time, obviously, you've always got people coming through that actually, for them, that's a feature, not a bug. And maybe they need that extra guidance. So that makes sense. And I'm glad personally. Some of my fondest memories were, doing CrossFit at what was Reebok CrossFit Tyneside at the time. I think it's just
Mm.
CrossFit Tyneside now. And obviously I know you train there a little bit as well.
Yeah, I mean, conversely, if you are good at building that community, you've widened the net massively. If you're a personal trainer in Newcastle, you've got a geographical limit to how many clients you can have. Whereas if you are good at building that community, that's been the lure for people doing online, because it's a lot easier to find 300 people out of 8 billion than it is to find a client base in your local area.
Yeah.
If you're geographically limited like that. So, the reason it's so popular is because it is good to do online coaching.
Mhm.
It's just that, now people are seeing that actually, whereas before there was a few online coaches and loads of personal trainers, now there's probably a bit more of an even split. So when people have got um, a really good in-person business, then they can really grow that. And the trade-off is that it is more limiting to run an in-person business. You are tied to that area. There's no sitting on your laptop in Bali. Like, you've probably got to be at that gym at 6 a.m. every day. And
But, realistically, I think people like what I've noticed is I know some exceptional PTs and a lot of the, girls and guys at Fit Squad as well. And the caliber is just ridiculous, but they choose to do in person. Like all of
yeah,
the in-person PTs that I know now choose to do it because they just prefer it. And
yeah,
that's the way that they want to operate, the way that they want to live their life. And
yeah,
also we can't substitute the fact that we go out of our way as an online business to have multiple in-person events a year because the depth and the quality of time in person spent is just you really can't substitute it.
no. And
But
sorry.
oh, sorry.
I think what you're saying there about they enjoy it as well. I think there is something about being in front of people and spending, like, as a person. So forget the client's perspective. From a personal trainer's perspective, it's engagement for them as well. I think that's something we just glossed over, really. That the online coaches, and I know you guys are running it together, which makes it a little bit different. But if you're an online coach who is literally just by yourself, then you don't get that in-person contact either. So the same reason that people might want to go into a gym because they sit at home all day working from home might be the same reason that a PT wants to, because they're actually going in there, speaking to people. Every session's different, every client's different. You're building those relationships. So I think, from the personal trainer's perspective as well, they might be leaving, some extra revenue on the table by not doing the online side of things, but they might be happy to, because they're like, well, I go in, I see my clients, I might have colleagues at work that I really like. I'm actually going in and speaking to some of the other PTs and training with them. I think that's what Fit Squad, we've really been conscious about that, because it's a very isolating thing sometimes to be a PT, especially if you're just, if you're in a private gym and you're by yourself a lot, or worse, if you're in a commercial gym but you feel like you can't have a relationship with the other coaches because
Yeah,
you feel like they're your competition and not your colleagues. um Whereas we're trying to build a culture where the there's not as much of a famine mentality in Dubai.
that's it. Yeah, and I think that's one thing that I always try and instill with my clients, is that there is infinite people. Like I always use like a really classic example of that. People have created their own niches out of thin air and gained millions and millions of followers. Like Outdoor Boys YouTube, for example, created a cult following online from literally inventing a type of YouTube video. And if there's millions of people that gravitate towards that really specific niche thing,
Hmm.
there's going to be people that are singing off the same kind of song sheet as you, and you can just find that community on the internet.
Yeah.
And my mum's got a YouTube channel about crafting and knitting and cross stitching and things like that. And she never thought there'd ever be more than, like a handful of people. And she's got like 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, which like that's a lot,
Yeah.
considering the bar to growth, bar to entries for growth on YouTube is so high. And I said, it is completely true that if there's 1,000 people that have gravitated towards you at that early stage, with more time and more practice, there is definitely 100,000 people out there
Mhm.
that are interested in the same thing. And I think that's the best thing about the online world opening up. And I suppose you get that opportunity as well if you are an in-person PT that is quite vocal and prominent online. You get to draw a wider net within that location, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then it comes down to, it gives people progression routes. So something that I've been really conscious of for the past couple of years is progression routes within the fitness industry. So since becoming the official education partner of Pure Gym, there's been a lot of discussions, in boardrooms talking about progression routes for people within the fitness industry. So, what does this individual's journey look like? Does it go from, do they start as a gym instructor, moving to a PT, move into a rent PT, which is where they kind of pay to use the space, or do they go down a management pathway? Are they looking to do online coaching? So, the idea is that you can go into an area of the industry now and there are more options, whereas before it was be an in-person PT. You might decide that you want to be an in-person PT for a couple of years. You build up a client base, you build up transformation photos, you build up know-how. Your business knowledge increases, so you start to understand, your profits. You start to understand return on investment if you're doing some marketing. I think that's another great thing about the fitness industry. It's a really low risk way to start a business and start learning business. If you want to avoid going to university and you want to just start making money whilst also learning about how to run a business, then a fitness business is really good. There's no stock, there's no overheads. You start to learn how to invest in your business and how that returns to you and when that returns to you. Social media is a big part of that. It's the ultimate like confusing ROI, because what is the ROI on posting an Instagram picture? Probably nothing. What's the ROI on posting one a day for the next 5 years? Probably life changing. And it's the same, and fitness is always a good one to come back to because there's no loads of analogies that I can use with students. So, what's the ROI of going and doing a push workout today? Probably nothing, probably won't change. That session probably will not change you. What's the ROI of consistently doing it 4 times a week for the next 5 years? Life changing. So it's that kind of understanding that there's, fitness and business are so synonymous that if you apply the same principles you do to your fitness to your business, then you will become good. And I think that's something that, if you have terrible coughs, which, we all do, other than like 5 people,
Yeah.
then if you just never, if you're terrible, if you've got a muscle or a part of your physique or a part of your fitness that's lacking, then you need to invest time into doing it. If you're terrible at sales, then you need to invest time into doing it. So it's just, you learn those principles which carry over so well. And I
100%.
think
And it's kind of true that a lot of the time, fitness people that engage in fitness or people that are athletes or fitness entrepreneurs are the best for business because they already have, like you said, that underlying discipline.
I think that's true, whether you work in fitness or not. If fitness is a big part of your life, it's always a good tool to have, because immediately, if you're in good shape and you look after yourself, people know something about you. They know that you can commit to a goal. They know that you can, you know, that you have the ability to delay gratification, or there's numerous things which come with being in good shape. And if you can apply that to one area of your life, you can apply it to every area of your life. So, I think fitness is a big part of most successful people's lives.
100%. I mean, there's that kind of meme, but it's also true. I think someone trades has an index on the S&P 500, but heavily like weighted towards CEOs which have a bench over 100 kilo, something like that, and it just massively outperforms the ones that don't. And it's just, the something about fitness and health that's generally great is it's the easiest and most kind of self-fulfilling or self-reinforcing way to garner respect. Anyone that is in good shape automatically, like you said, they are somewhat disciplined, they can delay gratification, they give a fuck about something, and that, at least they're going to be functioning somewhat to the best of their ability. And the army is actually a perfect place where you used to see this all the time. Doesn't matter. You could be the best, expert on something on the planet. You could be quintessentially the best at whatever it is your job is. But if you're out of shape, you lose respect. You don't
Mm.
carry the same kind of authority. And
Yeah.
it's just simply the fact of things. I think Higher Up Wellness went viral again the other day for saying, like, ultimately, if you're not in good shape, you will have less respect from people, and that's just
Yeah.
objectively true. Um,
We
but
are
yeah,
still hardwired with the DNA and the makeup of, all modern humans. We're talking about, 500,000 years of human beings, maybe longer, where up until, very recently, status symbols were how physically able you were, because it was a good indicator of, how long you were going to live and whether you are worth having around. Like if you can't carry yourself and you can't pull your weight, then y- you are no good to the community. Do you know what I mean? And it's not like that as much anymore. But I think that there is a great equalizer when it comes to fitness, because you said something before. Everybody wants to be in better shape, and there's not many sweeping statements like that which are true when you say everybody. I mean, I think back to the Wolf of Wall Street, where he says everyone wants to get rich, and he starts talking about this Amish dude, and he's going, he just wants to do this, and he's like, you did say that everybody wants to be rich, and he's but everybody wants to be in better shape, whether you are never stepped foot in a gym before or you are Mr. Olympia. Like Mr. Olympia looks at their, these guys look at their physique and go, oh, this could be better. That could be better. This needs to improve by next season. That needs to improve by next season. All the way down to somebody who's literally never stepped foot in a gym. If they could push a button and be in better shape, then they would. So it is sweeping across the full spectrum that everybody wants to be in shape, but it's a great equalizer. I'll speak to people, and this
yeah,
when I first started as PT. So one of the probably two of the most transformational moments that's allowed me to get into everything that I've been able to get into is the first one was somebody speaking to me very early in my career and saying, "You're not a personal trainer, you're a business person, your product's fitness." That was transformational for me, because I stopped thinking about being a personal trainer and I started thinking about this being a business. And then that transitions into any business. So when we get the opportunity for recruitment, we go, yeah, well, I understand business. I understand that, everything's downstream from leads. We have a product, we can take it to market. Every single business idea is 2 or 3 good conversations away from materializing. And then the other thing is the exposure to experts. So when I first started PTing, 19 years old, up until that point, I'd never been an authority figure. I'd always seen myself as a leader, whether it was in team sports, anytime in school, if there was an opportunity. But they were peers in terms of, they were people my age. Then you step into the fitness industry, and at that time, fitness was a real luxury product. So whereas now a lot of people have personal trainers, back then, doctors, dentists, lawyers, business owners, accountants, people
yeah,
with like, you know, esteemed jobs that you would associate with disposable income, and you would also associate with high levels of competency, education. They were the sort of people who had personal trainers because it was seen as a luxury. Um, so day in, day out, 40 hours a week, my peers became people who were, far more experienced than I was. They were, real established professionals. They might have owned businesses, been an accountant, solicitors, people that typically would never have went out of their way to speak to a 19-year-old fresh out of college. However, the great equalizer is that to them, I was their expert on fitness. So they were outsourcing their fitness expertise to me. And in turn, they spoke to me as an equal. So whenever I had a question, and believe me, I had questions every single day, hundreds of them, because I just couldn't believe that I was being exposed to this much information as a naturally curious person, someone who gets to spend 3 hours a week with a 55-year-old woman who owns an accountancy firm, who has children older than me. I'm literally every bit of information that I can get out of her. And because we're in this environment where she's coming to me and, we've got a minute in between sets and she's just freely giving me all of this information, which is still with me to this day, that I just would never have had exposure to. It could have taken me 10 years to learn everything that I learned in the first year. Because how often do you spend 3 hours with a solicitor a week that they're
100%.
paying for?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If try and book in 3 hours with a solicitor now, see how much it costs you. I was getting paid for those hours, and because the dynamic was, this person has something that I want. This person's able to help me achieve something I want to achieve. So naturally, the respect's there. So they're just, back and forward and giving you information and little thing. Oh, well, you need to make sure that you're doing X, Y, and Z. And then they're just more than happy to divulge that information because in that moment you're equals.
And it's, again, coming back to, I don't want to, flog a dead horse, but actually coming back to the whole fitness thing, there's very, very few aspects of life where the younger you are, the better, effectively. Like where being younger is an authority on that thing. And maybe you could say trends. You could be an authority more so if you were 20 versus 50. Beauty typically is loaded younger. But you're right. Being healthy and in shape is, I mean, it used to be massively, but like a quote unquote young people's game. And that's where you have the authority naturally and it wouldn't be questioned. Because if you say, to use that same example, say you were 19, 20, um, giving legal advice, someone who is, even if they've got the same amount of experience, in the field, someone who is 50, they have way more life experience, are going to be taken way more seriously. Whereas, if anything, with a PT, it might be the other way around.
Mhm.
Really, really interesting point, actually. And I think what's curious, and this is what I was actually going to ask you anyway, about how you developed this entrepreneurial mindset, because I know that, we both came from, very working class backgrounds. And it seems like you had just this real hunger and curiosity for just learning more about life and a humility to be able to understand that you didn't know shit at
Mhm.
the time.
Yeah, I do think about that often because some things that come as second nature to me are things that I see people struggling with. Um, whether it's the understanding of the bigger picture, the delayed gratification, understanding that, if you just put this time and effort in, then something good will come of it. Um, and you see people struggling with that, even you probably more so now, where they want an immediate return on anything that they do. It's like the first question is like, how does this benefit me? And you know, not really thinking about, well, how does benefiting this other person help me in the long run? Um, I think in terms of the entrepreneurial kind of spirit. So yeah, like we've said, when we've chatted before, so both my parents had one job their entire lives. So they left school and went into one place of work and then retired from that same place of work 40 years later. Um, they were very keen for my brother and sister to go to university, because it was an opportunity that they didn't have. So they really pushed my brother and sister to go down the university route. Um, my brother's 10 years older than I am, so once they'd done that, um, and there wasn't as big of a there wasn't as much pressure on me to go to university because my brother and sister had been. I was always academically good, but it wasn't really an environment for me. Um, they knew that if I'd went to university, I wouldn't have, you know, because I wouldn't have been passionate about it. I wouldn't have tried hard, and I'd have just wasted my time. So they encouraged me to not go to university and to get a job. Um, I first started in the fitness industry when I was at college. So I was 18, and a guy came in who was a personal trainer, gave our college class a talk and went through some stuff and said, if anybody's interested in knowing more about it, stay behind. I was the only person who stayed behind. Um, and that just interested me, what he was doing. He had a big personality, and he's still a good friend to this day. So I just started with him. I would help him with his classes. He used to pick me up early in the morning and take me to help him with his classes. And then that's how I got into the fitness industry. Um, and I never really, I just took it as it came. So, build up to a certain amount and then look at what's next. Um, I think the ability to spot trends has always been something that came natural to me. So I never really tried to fight against the trends that I was seeing. So I started in the fitness industry, was a PT for a couple of years from 19 to 21, got the opportunity to open my own gym at 21, did that. This was back in 2016 when I opened the gym. And then within a couple of months of opening the gym, obviously all of my friends started leaving university at 21. So I've had, 3 years, 2.5 years of PTing, and then they're all leaving university with no idea what to do. My generation was one of the first generations where everyone went to university, like regardless of your academic prowess, regardless of whether it was the right fit, regardless if you were even doing a real degree. People
Yeah.
were just universities were making up degrees because they'd increased the fees to 9K, and they were just pumping out ludicrous degrees that didn't have jobs attached to them. So a lot of people fell into that trap, went to university, got a degree in something that, had little to no transferable relatability to the workplace. And then they're looking for things to do. So people are coming to me going, I want to be a PT. I love fitness. I want to be a PT. And rather than think, well, God, I'm gonna have to compete with all of these people. I just thought, well, if you guys all want to be PT, then that's a need, and if I can figure out a way to fulfill that need, then I will. So that's when I got into the education, because I went, if you want to get qualified, I'll qualify you. If someone's going to make money, it's going to be me. So then I got into the education side of things and started teaching people because I saw people wanted to be in fitness. And then I think that the real underlying, if there was one thing that I do that underpins everything, it's being very conscious and searching for the biggest problem available to me that I can solve. And whatever the problem is, the bigger it is, the better it is for business, right? So when I first started, the problem that I was solving, and the only problem I could solve, and the only problem I was qualified or had the expertise to solve, was people wanted to be in better shape. Individuals wanted to look better. And I could help them with that problem. And it was maybe a 3 or 4 on their priority list of problems that they wanted to solve. I was solving the third or fourth biggest problem for individual people, paying their rent, their health, being in better shape. That was probably the order. And then the next problem was, well, people want to do a job that they love, which comes above probably being in shape and came with more revenue. So then I helped people with that. And then it just transitioned from there, really. Fast forward 8 years, and we're helping the biggest gym in the UK with its biggest problem. So Pure Gym's biggest problem is staffing its gyms. Last year it opened 85 gyms. This year it plans to open another 80 something. It opened
Wow.
60 in America. It's aiming to be at 1,000 gyms. Each gym needs 7 PTs. That's 7,000 PTs. They have a churn rate. So the problem now is, how do I help this multi-billion pound company with its biggest problem? So it's just searching for the biggest problem. And the bigger the problem, which is, if Pure Gym doesn't have 6 to 8 PTs per gym, it loses revenue. So if I can help a multi-billion pound company, you're talking about 2 million people paying £30 a month across the board. And if the PTs drop, then the revenue drops because clients leave, classes get cancelled, there's no one to train them. So it's just searching for what's the biggest problem for the biggest players, and just looking for that constantly. As soon as you've solved this small problem and there's a bigger problem that opens up, it feels like my moral obligation to solve that problem. Because if there's a problem that I can be solving that's massive, then the reward's massive. And and not just the financial reward, like, the everything, like the self-fulfillment. It's easy to get up and go to work every day when you feel like you're solving a huge problem.
I think that that little snippet there, that you just kind of spoke about, I think if any entrepreneur is going to take, or aspiring entrepreneur is going to take anything away from that conversation, it should be that. And what's interesting is scale it right back. You kind of talked us through how you solved a personal problem and are now solving a multi-billion-pound problem. But honestly, where you see a need and you can fill it, that can start with yourself, and often it does start with yourself. If you think back to the origin of most most very successful businesses, it's what problem did they have to solve for themselves first? So they
Mhm.
had that initial evidence. Did you have to engineer a solution? Did you have to do this? Did you have to do that? Fitness is a great example. How did you as an individual get into shape? And then just keep following that mindset.
Mm.
I think that's an incredibly powerful insight when someone's looking at balancing up. Like if you have an aspiration to be wealthy, obviously you can get compensation from bringing value and working downstream from how can I bring value now? How can I bring value next? How can I bring more value until, like you said, you're solving, you know, a large percentage of the world's problems. That's how you create a
Yeah,
multi-billion-pound company.
yeah,
But actually, that's something I wanted to talk to you about. Like how, as a business owner, obviously you've made it to this threshold now where you're managing these very big contracts and partnerships. How how do you go about obviously acquiring those kind of partnerships and managing them? Because it's a pretty big deal.
yeah. Acquiring them is always proving what you can do. Everybody is going to tell you what they can do. That's something that you find, it doesn't matter where you are, people will tell you what they're able to do, but nobody cares. If you can go in and show that you can solve a problem, if you can prove it to them, then they have no choice but to go with you. So with Pure Gym, we've been working with them for 2 years, and it first started on a small scale. I can solve the problem of staffing in gyms in this local area. And then once you do that, they'll cast the net out wider, right? We've got a problem in Bristol. Okay, we'll prove that it works in Bristol. Now it works in 2 places. Birmingham's a target area. Okay, we'll prove it there. Nobody's ever been able to crack the South. Okay, we'll go and do that. All the gyms that are in London, we'll start helping with them. Then what you get is all of, when they're looking for a new contract for an education company that can handle all their education recruitment nationally, all the big players are going to come in, all the big gym companies, the big gym education companies, and they did. They all pitched and they all went, we have this many students. If you give us the contract, we will give you exposure to these students. We have these students, we will give you exposure. Will, can. Our pitch was, this is what we've already done. You've got 250 PTs now in club working. The drop off rate is this. This is the evidence. It's impossible not to go with it. So if you're willing to do more in the interim and know that, you can sustain that and you can do that and you can go out and prove what you can do without the security, because there's no security at first. You can't, people want to get security, and if you go for security, you'll always be playing small. So, you get a security from working a job, but the upper limit of what you can make from that is always going to be capped at something, because realistically, you're taking that certainty now over backing yourself. So it's going in and showing what you can do in real time with real evidence, so that when everybody else is presenting what it could look like, you're presenting what it already looks like. And with this much exposure, this is what it definitely, with complete certainty, this is what it will look like. And that's what it has, evolved into. Now we're able to, what we did in 2 years, we're able to do in 2 months every time that we're recruiting people in, because we'd already built out those pathways and we'd already figured out, when there was no scrutiny, all of the things that we need to change. So that's the initial one. So getting something, you need to prove to people why they should do it. And, that looks different
Evidence
in every
speaks for
single
itself.
business. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That looks different in every single business. But also, conversely, think about it now. If we wanted to go to the biggest gym chain in Asia and help them, now we don't need to go in and do what we did with Pure Gym because we could take the evidence that we have. So, what this looks like with a personal trainer on a small scale, get yourself in shape. If you can do it for yourself, you can do it for other people. Get a friend, get them in shape. So now you've got two bits of evidence that you're able to do something. And now
I've
when
got case
people are
studies.
buying into you, you've got case studies. And once you've got case studies, then you can go in and then you can demand, well, yeah, actually, we want this massive retainer for doing this and we want this percentage. And for all they know, that's what you're getting elsewhere. So in terms of gaining the business, you need to prove why you deserve it. And if you don't have a case study, you need to make one. In terms of keeping the business and in terms of managing the business and putting systems in place, the first thing it's important the people that you have around you. So the individuals that you're trusting with the elements of the business that you need them to do will always for me be behavioral based. So what are the behaviors that people administer? Because that is fundamental to that person. If somebody doesn't have the natural ability, but they have the behaviors, the ability will come. If somebody has the natural ability, but they don't have the behaviors, then it'll the results just won't follow. So finding the people with the correct behaviors for the specific roles is the most important thing for managing those relationships. And then I'd say in terms of, proving that you can keep things going, that it's sustainable, then it's there's a multitude of different things, the systems that you embed, the relationships that you build.
Obviously, the results that you continue to produce. Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean there, and I think that's a really, really valid point as well. Talking about how, I mean, in our business, one of the most crucial hires and team members that we have, she was actually on paper the least qualified we ever hired. However, she's obsessively positive and she has the most formidable mindset. So I completely agree. Like, and I say this to people all the time that are building and scaling teams. One of the most important things you can ever do is bring the right people on board. I mean, you know, early days of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg hired his sister, who like definitely wasn't the most qualified. Randy Zuckerberg. I heard her speak at an event actually once. She wasn't the most qualified or like the most, you know, experienced in. I think she was in charge of their marketing, ironically. Um, but she was the right person because she was fucking all in and committed and had that tie, and she was
Yeah,
willing to like lay her life down, metaphorically for 10 years to build the business, and now she's a billionaire,
yeah. And
because of her shares.
she 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 had a vested interest that she was obviously, it was somebody that was close to her that she was helping, and she cared. That is, you know as important to the success of a business, creating an environment where people give a fuck and
Yeah,
where, people are looking at ways that they can not only do their job but improve on themselves and on the position, and taking onus of certain aspects of the business. And also as a business owner and entrepreneur, bringing people in who you think are better at you than certain elements and giving them free reign. Like when
yeah,
I bring people in to do certain things, it's not prescribed, because if it was all going to be prescribed, then why would I need them? I need someone who sees things differently to I do, who will take an area of the business and make it their own, and they get free reign to do that. And there's no criticism. There might be, if they want to try something, they try something. If they can justify it to me, then I'm happy, because how do I know that whatever I would have done would have worked? I don't. There's
yeah,
no going back at the crossroads. You just move forward from here. So giving people that free reign, giving them the flexibility to make mistakes, and then backing them on those mistakes, and then looking at solutions. I don't mind that at all. And we said about, when I was talking about the solving a problem, and you said this is something that any entrepreneur can take, and it's typically a problem that they solve for themselves. I think, if it's a step by step thing, the first thing you need to solve is the first issue that people probably have to solve is a mentality thing. Some people are lucky. Some people are lucky they never have to solve that. They just, they come out of the womb with the right mentality. They come out and it's never something they have to struggle with. If you don't have the mentality, then that's the first thing you need to look at. After the mentality, it's definitely a skill problem. So once you've got the right mentality, now you need the right skills. So many people come to me and they want to earn 10 grand a month. They say, I want to be making 10 grand a month, blah, blah, blah. And I feel like getting them and bringing them into a room with 10 other people who make 10 grand a month and going, what about you suggests that you should be making the same as them, because their mentality is great, but their skills are better. So, and this isn't a knock on anybody. It might just take you 10 years to build the skills that you need to be a 10K a month, entrepreneur. It's it's not impossible, but you might have to spend 10 years doing that. But once you've done that, you've got the skills. And this is another thing, like the confidence that this business could go tomorrow, all of them could. But the skills that I've built and then the connections that I've built would just
Yeah.
bring it all back within a year, because it's never a mentality issue. The skill issue isn't there. So I can use the skills that I've gained to do it again. And then, if you spend those first 10 years of your career building the skills required to be formidable in your area, then after that, everything's downstream. You've got the mentality, you have the skill set that you need. They're the two internal problems that you needed to solve. Right. Now, with this mentality and with this skill set, what's the next biggest available problem that I can solve? Okay, people have this need X, Y, and Z. I can solve this need for millions of people, or I can solve this need for a small percent of millionaires. Just figure out which one, whatever makes the most sense to you, and then just go after it from there.
And what you've just described is exactly what I, in my research, have found to differentiate those operating in the 1% and those who kind of like, toy around just above average, is whether your view of the world and, your ability to operate in the world, you internalize the agency, the kind of responsibility, or you externalize it.
Mm-hmm.
So many people get to a point where their environment, that they have kind of ridden the environment to get to where they are, and when the environment changes or leaves, they can't change with it because they've kind of ridden the coattails. And exactly as you just said, we had this conversation recently. Every clock goes back to zero. It's not ideal, but that's okay. I have learned everything I needed to. I have all this experience, and we can go again. And I suppose a really good example for this conversation and a lot of the topics and themes is Alex Hormozy, because he represents a lot of the different elements that we've been talking about. But listen, Alex, I want to kind of start to bring this into land, and I really
Yeah.
appreciate you. I know that you've got to go soon.
One
So
one final note that I'd give as well, because we've spoke a lot about everything that we've done and the ideas and stuff, and this might be something that people take and can really do something with. In this whole time, I've never done anything by myself. I have never once done everything or been in a venture where I've been completely by myself. I've always had other people, because I've always acknowledged what my weaknesses are. And the first thing after I build the skills gap, or, the first thing I did is find somebody who can help me do the things that I'm not good at. So the first step was always finding somebody that could help me do the things that I'm not good at. You've got a sounding board. So I think a lot of people will sit there and say, yeah, I can do X, Y, and Z. There's so many things that I can't do. But identifying people quickly who can and collaborating with them is, if you're going to take a couple of things away from this, that's them. Find somebody else who has the things that you need, and just be completely, humble about it. I need this person to do this. I think a lot of people want to, they see the figurehead, they see the Zuckerberg, they see the Elon Musk, they see all of the people that have come to the forefront, and maybe that'll never be me. Maybe I'll always be the person that you don't hear about. Maybe I'll always be the person that, you know, is also there, but they didn't rise to prominence. They were in the background, but those people are still making a fucking killing, even though you've never heard of them. And you know what? I bet sometimes the person who is number one wishes that they were number two.
yeah, because that anonymity, or that lack of publicity, I think there's a kind of common understanding that once you surpass kind of $30 million in cash assets, and you're in and around that $30 million place, life doesn't really massively change beyond that. You can
I'll
afford to pretty much do whatever you want.
I'll let you
Um,
know. I'll let you know in a couple of years. Yeah, we'll
um,
up and we'll see if that's true. I might be
but
like, "Look that."
but having the humility to understand where your weaknesses are, I think is really crucial to success.
Mhm.
And is there any books, podcasts, YouTube videos, any one piece of media that has really affected you? Could be recently or in the past.
Yes, Oversubscribed by Daniel Priestley.
Okay.
Um, just really helpful in terms of, um, understanding how to build a business that has constant demand and manufacturing and just in the way that I'll speak to people in a sales interaction and things. I found that book really helpful. I found the $100 million dollar leads really helpful from
The whole
Alex
series.
Hormozy.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
phenomenal.
very good. And then Way of the Wolf by Jordan Belfort. Just the ability to go into those interactions with a plan. They're probably three. I haven't read many books. I've always been, I've never read. I don't think I've read any of those books. I just listened to them because I was always someone who wanted to just do and then figure out from there. But those books were, you know, really helpful,
Really
and I
influential.
always think as well. I don't know if this is a something that I found really profound about those books is that on Audible, it's the author reading them. And I just resonated so much more. Like listening
Yeah.
to Jordan Belfort talk about it, listening to Alex Hormozy talk about it, in fact, I think Daniel Priestley wasn't read by him, but I've seen a lot of his his stuff, and just listening to them and taking the bits that you feel are applicable to you.
Yeah, 100%. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, specifically the $100 million series, I have listened to and read all of them. And each just, yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
But Where the Wolf is also, I think, pretty special, specifically for all male entrepreneurs. Just for whatever reason, I think it just strikes a chord. But that's fantastic. And I've borrowed a tradition from Diary of a CEO where I get old guests, previous guests, to leave questions
Hmm.
for future guests. It's not chronological or anything. And the one I picked out for you today is, if no one was watching, um, what would you do? Or actually, so I'll re-ask that. If no one was watching, what would you do more of, or what would you do less of?
Oh, that is a good question. Um, that's a great question. I mean, most of the time people aren't watching, to be fair. I think if nobody was watching, I'd probably give myself more permission to. So I was speaking about this the other day. Sorry, one second. Um, if no one was watching, I think giving myself more permission to feel satisfied with where everything's at. I think that's something that, I've been really trying to work on. And, when you've got a team of people and you're trying to push them on and you're trying to, encourage them and be the leader, um, you can often kind of fall into a trap where you want to be shown to be like out at the front, like working the hardest, pushing the hardest, like doing all the things so that people can see that and they think this isn't someone who's resting on their laurels. Like this is someone that if I buy into what they're doing, then it's going to benefit me. I think, you know, just draw a line under certain scenarios and say, okay, Friday, I've done everything that I needed to. I've done everything to move the business forward. I'm just going to go and relax over the weekend and just take that time back to myself. So that's something that you can feel the pressure to always be um like an example. But I think sometimes just saying to yourself like, no, we've achieved what we needed to this week. You've really put in the hard work. Now go and take that time to yourself, refresh, get back in,
Mm.
and I think that's something that's really important. But you can only do that if you do attack the time that you do have.
And I think that insinuates a kind of pressure and responsibility for you to genuinely be leaving it out all on the field.
Mhm.
And yeah, I suppose what that sounds like is if no one was watching, being able to actually pace yourself better and give yourself a little bit more credit for the things that you have achieved, as opposed to feeling like you're constantly having to
Yeah.
more. So, and interestingly, that's across the board. I think that all high performers really struggle with that, and it's a skill ultimately that gets developed. But no, that's fascinating, and I'll collect your question for someone else at the end. But Alex, I love you dearly, and I appreciate the life out of you. Where can people go to find you?
Um, Mainly on our business pages. So we got FitPro X Academy, which is all of the education side of things, and then Fit Squad DXB for anybody who's, a personal trainer who's thinking about moving to Dubai and setting up there. We've got a great community and opportunities to help people. Um, so yeah, they're the two main places.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to chatting again and covering, the other 70% of the stuff I wanted to talk
Yeah,
about.
yeah,
But yeah,
absolutely.
thank you so much,
Okay.
mate.
Cheers, mate.